All right, man. Welcome to Crow 777 Radio. This is episode 236. Jason Lindgren is with me, and Carla. We're going to be going over the biofield. We had Eileen on. So many people went out to check out the tuning forks. I've actually seen an astonishing number of emails from things like shoulder injuries, all kinds of things like that people have had problems with, and they report that the pain reduction is almost immediate. I can't tell you how many emails I've seen. So I would estimate that it's not deniable. There's something to this. Myself and Jason both got the tuning forks. I know Jason was very impressed, but jump in, Jason. How are you?
It's a fine, hot Louisiana morning here, but yes, indeed, I love the tuning fork. I use it every day.
So, I mean, I think the first day you got it, you were impressed. And I said the first day I got it, I did the crown or, the hairline thing. And it was weird because the first time I touched my hairline, basically up high between my eyes, but at the hairline, I could hear my heartbeat, but it sounded kind of noisy. It was weird. And so I hit it again. And I put it up there, and it was a little bit less. The third time I did it, I couldn't hear it anymore, and I haven't heard it since. And I know you had almost immediate results that you were impressed with.
Yeah, I could feel it working right away. Oh, how would I explain it? The way the field interacted with me, it's like I could feel where it needed to go, and I was moving it over different parts of my body, and then I switched over to doing it on Rose. She's hit and miss with it sometimes. We're having success sometimes to help her. Depending upon which part of her body we're talking about. If she's having a really bad problem, sometimes it's too much for me to be able to get it on her and hold it in one position because she can't stay in one position. But then again, there's been times where she's been feeling upset to her stomach, and the tuning fork has been able to bring her out of it.
Well, as I have said on so many episodes, I think the idea of cymatics and what that encompasses, which would probably encompass this to some degree, almost certainly, I think it's one of the most hidden things that we used to know about, and maybe one of the most important. I think there are so many things that we kind of lost as we came forward in time. But anyhow, let's get Carla in here. Welcome, Carla.
Hi. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, it's a pleasure. How are you doing?
I'm doing just fine.
Grand day. I know we're hot where Jason and I are. You said it was pretty decent, but let's jump right in here. Now, part of the reason we decided to cover you so quickly behind Eileen is I started to get emails about distance, using the tuning forks at a distance. So I'm going to pick up on some of the bullet points that you've laid down here. Can you kind of describe a distance session? And also another part of this that I like, it reminds me, and I think, and I accept this all day long, the idea of a chef. In some Chinese cultures and other things, they used to literally say, if the chef is in a bad mood, then his food suffers. And this comes back to the maybe Western idea where we would always say the most important ingredient when mom's making food is the love she puts in it. I accept it all day long. And I think there's a bit of this in your distance session idea because you mentioned focusing your intention. So can you just kind of start to outline? Oh, I'm sorry. You know what we should do first here? You've got a new website. Can you tell folks where they can find you?
Yes, it's ancestralriver.com, ANCESTRAL river.com.
Okay, perfect. We'll do that again at the end. Jason, try not to let me forget. So we're going to cover briefly, if you can just outline what distance sessions are. And I know you're going to touch on the idea of ether, which I think is a critical idea as well.
Yes, I do a lot of distance sessions. It works because there's ether in the air. Ether has been described as the luminous body of light through which light flows. And I like that definition of it. Our intentions are particles of light, charged particles, and they flow on the light waves. And so when we hold an intention, and the ether also works on the light waves because it is light, and it holds a record of everybody that has ever lived or is living. And so whoever I wanted to do a session on, my intention would be, okay, I'm going to do a session on this person, and I use their hologram. I'm usually either talking on the phone with the person, or I am on a Zoom or Skype call with them at the same time. And so I have a connection. You can do it without a connection at the time because it all works on intention. And from that point on, Pretty much it's just like a in-person session for me anyway, because I almost see that hologram in front of me, and I work on it as if it was a regular person laying there.
So I think it's so interesting because some of what you're talking about here pretty much mirrors the ideas that we heard from Walter Russell about light and what it actually is and the idea of the ether. But I've got to ask, I'm imagining you've done work with people when they're with you. Do you notice a significant difference when you're remote and when someone's actually, with you?
No, I really don't notice much of a difference at all. Because now it might be a difference if I didn't have a phone or Zoom connection at the time, just because I wouldn't be talking with the person as I go and explaining what I'm doing and saying what I'm finding and asking them how they feel and stuff like that. So, but otherwise, if there's at least a verbal connection between me and the client, then I don't notice a difference between it and a in-person session.
I think most of us have had experiences that relate to what you're talking about. We just don't think about it. How often has anyone listening all of a sudden thought of a person that's close to them and then the phone rings and it's that person? But more so when we're talking about the idea that there's ancestral records, that begins to mirror the Akashic record idea. Wouldn't you say, Carla?
Well, I don't understand the Akashic real well, but I grew up in a Christian background, and so I see it as the book of life, which I think is probably the same thing.
I agree with you. I think that culturally we think about things that fit the culture that we're in. I kind of appreciate that you said that. Do you consider yourself, back in the 70s, they used to call it ESP and psychic. Do you consider yourself a person who has more than the average person's abilities in that regard?
I wouldn't call it psychic abilities. I have always been probably too sensitive emotionally for my own good. And then when I ran into problems with that in my early adult life and I had made bad decisions and stuff, then I kind of canceled all that. And I said, okay, that's not working. I'm going to operate like these men in my office operate. I'm just going to go on, facts and what's really present. And instead of going on my emotions or feelings or my gut. And so that's what I did up until I came across this modality with using tuning forks. And then I thought, oh, wow, I can be myself again. Because it highlights you can do an actual session just listening to the tone of the fork and feeling that vibration. You don't have to be extra sensitive at all to do it. You can, as far as I've noticed anyway, you can go by the literal aspects. But there is so much more because emotions are more than just the sound and more than just the vibrations. It's feeling as well. And the person you're working with has these feelings. And so you learn to feel and listen with more than just your ears. You listen with the energy of your own body.
So I'd like to hear your point of view on the ether. And by the way, I noticed in your notes, I do not accept ether as a theory. I accept ether as a fact. And I think people like Michelson and Morley did experiments that could be replicated. And I think that's very different from gravity. To this day, gravity is in fact a theory. Matter of fact, it's a theory based on a theory. But give us your ideas about ether and how it interplays with what you're doing.
Well, I think what people call God or source, however you see your higher power or the source of life, for sure it's the source of light in the world because light existed, according to the Genesis story, anyway, light existed before the sun was created. So that means to me, ether was present from the start. And I see God as being in the ether. I think what people would call God or source is more than the ether. I think his being exists beyond the Earth system that we call home. But I think God is part of the ether, or is in the ether. I think from Bible, I think of heaven as being the ether, and at least that's how I've come to see it in this work, because there are the records of everybody that has ever lived in the ether, and so we have ancestral DNA in our bodies that often determine our hair color or our eye color and such like that. And so it also determines emotional makeup of us. And I find the emotions of ancestors in different parts of the person's biofield because they exist in the ether.
So before I kick it over to Jason here, I'll just make this one comment. It's a bit ironic because science has been busy for a long time, at least since Einstein, telling us the ether doesn't exist. Einstein's the man who made that dictate, never proving, showing any experiment, just dictating. Doesn't exist. And so what I was going to point out is, early on when I was getting my technical degree, I thought it was very ironic that you needed an Ethernet cable. They had not forgotten the word or the kind of artificial way they were going to implement it. They named it the Ethernet cable. But were you going to add something there?
Yes, I've seen a quote from Einstein, though it was later, like in the earlier 1900s. I can't remember the year for sure, but he had said, basically sub-quoting him, it was like, for the world to work the way it does, there has to be ether.
I'd like to look up that quote. What I'm familiar with is the things that happened on the tail of what Michelson and Morley did. But Jason, you want to jump in?
Well, I like the idea that you had a Christian background, and I'm assuming that's still sticking with you to some degree. And you don't feel that what you're doing is wrong or something to that degree, how a lot of people might paint what you're doing. Do you have an idea how the general Christian community would view what it is you do?
Yes, I do. Yeah, I have relatives that, think want to have it stay at arm's length, don't want to do anything. I have other Christian people that I work on, and they're very open to it. So it just, I don't know, in general, from my aspect of growing up, I came out of the Christian church as a number of years ago, 10 or 12 years ago. And I do retain quite a few of the beliefs, but I have found them, more limiting, that the truth is kind of bigger than what that is. And I seek truth, which is God, it's himself. And when I first learned about this, I was nervous about it. It just kind of happened after I had started using tuning forks. Then when I started feeling the emotions, that's when I started noticing things. And so when I first noticed, just in a session working with the ancestors' feelings, that was fine because that's all part of DNA, right? And so that was acceptable to me. But when I began feeling the actual presence, live presence of these ancestors in my sessions, and they started speaking to me and asking me for help, I knew I wasn't crazy, because I didn't expect this to happen. And I would have never have made up something like that. And because of my Christian background, I thought it was woo-woo, right? I thought it was evil. I used to think that way. But in this work, then I realized it's not. It's just different than what I've ever understood before. And I see it the way I've come to experience is that my Christian perspective on how the afterlife works isn't the way it really is. From my perspective. And I grew up believing that when someone died, you either went to heaven or you went to hell. Your body died, and I believed that your soul just kind of, not really dead, but stayed sleeping or unaware until the second coming of the Messiah. And At that point, your life was restored only with a heavenly body. And to some degree, that is true. From what I see now, I still think that's one of our purposes in our lives of being human here, is to choose if you want to be part of the light or part of the dark. I see the light as truth and voluntarist minded, in that everyone is created equal and everybody is offered all the resources of the ether, the same amount for everybody if you want it. And whereas the dark side I see is hierarchy. It puts everybody at different values, or all people are valued differently, and you're told different lies according to what value they place on you. And you can only get so far, you can only get so much because of what value you're considered to be. And that's hierarchy. Anyway, so I still see that as one of our purposes in life, is to choose which side. Bible says you can't choose two masters, and I believe that's so. But what I have found in the working in the biofields is that what it appears is that there's a great number of people who have not made that choice when they die. And from as near as I can determine, it might have been because of my client's emotions for them, or it might have been because of that ancestor's emotions that were unresolved because of experiences in their lives, or it might have been because of fear. There's a great number of different reasons. But anyway, for some extent, or for some reason, they don't make a decision for either the light or the dark. And I know for me, I have worked as far back in my own family as a great-great-grandparent, and they're still there in the ether. They're waiting to be able to make a decision. It's like they've been ready for a while. They just need help of some kind in addressing this issue that has held them back. And then they're able to fully transition to whichever side it is.
So I think there's a lot of that going on in the world right now. So many people just opting to go along with the dark side, not approving, but nonetheless going along with it to get along. And I think we'll see a turning point on that. But let's get into the nuts and bolts. Let's get into the activated tuning fork. And part of the reason I wanted to contact you is I got a number of emails from people saying in their experience the biofield didn't stop at this many feet, or, it went way out. I think some people even claimed 30, 40 feet. And as we open this conversation, you're doing it remotely. But I noticed you started to delineate 5 to 6 feet, 2 to 3 feet, and you also start to talk about the fourth state of matter. So when you're using the tuning forks, are you sensing it? Do you hear it in the vibration? Just kind of walk us through how big is the human biofield? And I also notice here you point out that it seems to be a toroid shape. So can you just walk us through actually using the forks, how you sense or hear or whatever it is when you're using them? And what is the biofield? How far away from us does it go? Is this 6 foot distancing keeping our biofields apart or something? What can you add?
Well, when I start a session by activating a person's energy flow so that all the energy within the biofield is communicating well, so that I can find what I need. And I hold the intention of finding what it is the biofield is ready to release that at that point in time. And then I activate a tuning fork. I strike it on either a hockey puck, depending on which fork I'm using, or I have a hiking boot that seems to give a good resonance to one of the weighted forks. So for weighted forks, I would use my hiking boot. And so anyway, so I start at the edge. I kind of step off an area so I know that it's like 5 to 6 feet away around a body on the sides. And then on below and above the body, it extends 2 to 3 foot to the top of the toroid shape. From near as I can tell, the vortex or the tops of your central channel, like if you drew a line straight through from your crown to the between your feet on the floor, then you have chakra centers, one about a foot above your head and one about a foot below your head, and energy centers of subtle energy that hold emotions and hold your memories as well as your biofield does. And then, but those are like the vortex or the top of the central channel of your energy. And then, but the tops of the shoulders of the toroid, if you want to call it like shoulders, then that would extend 2 to 3 feet above your body and 2 to 3 feet below. So when you activate a fork and stand at the edge of an estimate of the 5 to 6 feet out, then when you just strike the fork, then it's a nice, clear tone. I use an unweighted fork so I can hear the tone. And then the energy, it's the energy of the biofield. It's different. That's why it's thought to be plasma than just ether. Plasma is kind of like cells that no longer have cell membranes. It's kind of the separated nuclei and the electrons that are dispersed within this. But it's more concentrated. You could say the particles are closer together than in the ether themselves. And so there's a very subtle difference, but you feel it. If there's dissonance in the membrane, then you hear the difference, but it's the biofield that tells us where it is.
So the contention here is that memories and emotions are actually stored in the so-called biofield as you get a few feet away from the physical body?
They've been found, yes, that the biofield is full of memories and emotions. Each of the energy centers or chakra centers down your central channel have been found to deal more with different types of emotions. And so in the biofield horizontal to those chakras, then are found from your body out to the edge of your biofield are found emotions and experiences, memories of your lives. The edge of the biofield at about 5 to 6 foot out it starts with your parents' lives, and then gestation and birth. Those are really close together. And then it goes from there to current day at your body. And so it is a timeline of your body very much so. In a session, I can be working on a person and I strike the fork and move toward the body holding the fork in the field, and the tone changes. And sometimes it's the vibration. Sometimes most of the time, it's my whole body that feels the emotion or feels a real tenseness in it. And then sometimes I receive a mental picture of what was going on in the person's life or something that was happening, what the person looked like sometimes. Sometimes I just feel the emotion. Sometimes it's like a communication through the either, oh yeah, this person fell down, or this person, almost drowned, or something like that. And anyway, and then I can tell my client, I hit this piece of energy that is, if they were 40, then halfway would be 20. And so if it was at the halfway point, I can say, hey, it looks like you're about the age of 20, and I feel this emotion. I'm in this chakra energy, and it's about that type of emotion, and it seems to be this type of experience. Do you have any recollection of that, or is there anything you would like to say about that to help express and release the energy? And usually you're really, really close to on age and what was happening.
There was another thing in your notes that I found interesting here is the idea that your ancestral ideas that you're putting down is that the feminine ancestry would be on the left side of the body and the masculine or the fathers on the right side, which I think is very interesting. Most people have forgotten, but even in building in the United States, maybe more so when I was younger, almost always when you're in a restaurant or somewhere, the women's bathroom would be on the left side and the men's on the right. I think that started to change a little bit more, but it almost shows that I'm guessing that some architect or a builder somewhere isn't sitting there saying, hey, man, we need to make sure the women's bathroom's on the left in this building. And yet we would see that quite commonly. And actually, if you pay attention, to this day, I still see it, not as much as I did, I think, in the 70s, where it was almost always. Matter of fact, when I was young, I always wondered why is all the women's stuff on the left? And this goes into the whole idea of Latin that I've looked at, that there used to be an idea that the left side of the body was the negative pole. And they had a special name for it. I forget what it's called. But I think that's a very interesting idea. But doesn't this imply, so I guess most of us could maybe remember back to a grandparent or a great-grandparent, but does this mean the biofield would get more subtle the further away you got, all the way back to the idea of an Adam or an Eve?
Well, I'm still finding that out in how far back it would go. But in the immediate biofield, close to your, within that 5 to 6 feet from the body, there are these areas. It's not the whole biofield. It's these areas a few inches off either side of the body that contain the ancestral information of the mothers on the left, the fathers on the right. The rest of the biofield has the emotions, and the left side of the biofield is what you would call feminine energies. And then the right-hand side would be termed masculine energies, although every person, either man or woman, has both aspects of these energies. It's just that often one shows up more in men and the other shows up more in women. Say, like, feeling powerless would maybe show up more in women, whereas men it would show up more as anger. But they're just the same side of the coin, or the same coin, but different sides, something like that. But it is thought that we have repeated layers of biofields to infinity. And what I have found in the second biofield, so it would start at about 6 feet from your body and extend to about 30 feet away from your body. I've found energies up to 25 feet, but it might go further than that. And I find that second biofield is all about the ancestors. And all the ancestors, from my parents to the great-great-grandfather that I've cleared for, are all found in that second biofield.
So, well, I was going to add, what's interesting about that is it kind of, in some ways, I think kind of what you're talking about almost mirrors the indigenous human beings of Australia, which I've tried to meet a number of indigenous people from Australia because I'm interested in very old things. And they are one who claim they're among the oldest continuous civilizations, if that's the right word, which I know it's not. But they talk in a similar way about the ancestors. And what's strange about it is we deal with it in a totally different way. Like when we lose a grandparent or somebody, we remember them, we put their pictures up. And a lot of the indigenous things, that ancestor had a unique name that was uniquely given to that human being when they were young. And when they pass away, they no longer reference that name. They certainly, I don't think, would be having images and everything. But if what you're saying is correct, it's almost like you wouldn't need to because the record of it is here. I mean, what do you think?
It's definitely everybody that has ever lived, I would think, is in the ether. I have only found back that far to the great-great-grandparents, so that would have been toward the mid-1800s, probably when he was born. I'm not sure, maybe early 1800s. And I don't know how. I would assume that ongoing amounts could be of your ancestors going back in time can be found in this. I don't know that yet, but just like, say, like DNA, say with your parents, my dad was Dutch, my mom was more Swedish, and so I'm half and half. And so if their parent was one or the other, then I would be a fourth from the grandparent and an eighth from the great-grandparents, back and forth, back and back. And so that from the further of your ancestors get back in time, the less of that would show up in your DNA because you would have so much more DNA from other contributors, right? And so I am curious to find out, how much of that can be found and how it affects us in our lives today. Their emotions that were still exist in in your DNA, how that still affects us in my day-to-day life. However, I had another thought too that, again, this was from Bible study and stuff, but the Bible says it was in Matthew after Christ died, or when he died on the cross, then it says that there was an earthquake, and he let out a cry, and then there was an earthquake, and graves were opened, right? And then 1 Peter chapters 3 and 4, there's a thing that says that after his death, he preached to those in prison. And so I'm wondering if what he was doing, or what happened because he was who he was, and that he was able to release the people who had died before then, allow them to make their decision. If this is not perhaps those in the graves, the symbolism of those in the graves or those in prison that opened that. So if that is true, then my work or other people's work in clearing the ancestors so that they can fully transition then would only go back to the time of Christ.
You know what's interesting about this is I think a lot of people up in the modern age who have been more mainstream in the things they think about are going to have a tough time with any of this. But this is what it reminds me of. When I was young in the 70s and still trying to find out if the Loch Ness Monster existed in Bigfoot,
Right.
I remember a thing called Kirlian photography. And the first time I saw it, I thought, wow, that's amazing. That's an image of something. So truly something has to be there. And then I remember after there was this big craze that you could see what they called an aura at the time, very new agey. All these articles started to come up on what a bunch of new agey nonsense Kirlian photography was, and everything to defame it, to the point where as a young person, I was influenced by what they said later, thinking, okay, so I was fooled. It's all nonsense. But then when you get back around, and I haven't looked at it for a long time, any legitimate photography of any kind is picking something up, right? Unless it's wholly fake from the beginning. But you can see what's gone on in the mainstream. The ideas that we're talking about here, I think for the average person are very difficult to consider. But at the same time, I got enough emails from people who were not way out in left field, still live in the hippie era, talking about the biofield and how far. And so if I followed you correctly, there's an initial biofield from your point of view that's at 5 to 6 feet, something like that. Then the second biofield, 25, 30-ish feet, and that you've laid down, and it may extend beyond that to Lord knows. And if I followed you correctly, if we think about how people get their ancestry, why are your eyes green? And you did it correctly. I'm half and half too. So I could track back, then you go to a half, then you go to a fourth, and it quickly diminishes. So I'm guessing you would have to be a very sensitive person to track back much further than maybe a grandparent or a great grandparent. But did I get all that right? Or is that the contention? Initial biofield, 5, 6 feet, then maybe what could be called a second biofield at 25 to 30, and then likely more beyond that.
That's what I have found, and of the first two, and that's what I have heard that it can I can't say that word, theoretically extend to infinity. And if so, then that would explain for a lot of communication, because our biofields would all be overlapping with each other. So they would all be in communication, with people that we're in contact with on a regular basis, and as well as relatives and things, communicating through the light waves within our biofields. But it can also work by intention, because that's what I'm guessing, that if I was just to let it happen and let the biofield, say, of a given client or myself, if I'm doing a self-tuning, let the biofield pull up what it wanted to release that day of an ancestral memory, if that's what it wanted to release, then I'm guessing that perhaps a great-great-grandparent, maybe one more generation, maybe all, but I don't know that for sure. It might be more. But because the ether holds a record, I can hold the intention in a session, and I could say, I am clearing my client's biofield of dissonant emotion from such and such such and such a grandparent, and name their name, and have that be what I find in the field. And I have asked for specific ones and have it happen, but I haven't asked for specific ones back past the great-great-grandparent. So I don't know. I'm very much learning. I find this fascinating. And as I do my biofield work, especially I do trial things on myself to find out, okay, well, what will happen if I do this, or what will happen if I do that, to find out the limitations or the benefits of it. But I do it through my own biofield or through a client's biofield because I know they can be found, the information found in the biofield, but also it's a tremendous benefit to people now living, to myself or to the clients, because it's just amazing how much the ancestral emotions affects not just your skin color and eye color, but it's like it affects your whole mindset, your emotions. Like I went through most of my life, fear was a big issue, fear of a lot of things. Not like being scared of a lion or scared of a dog or stuff like that, but fear of getting in trouble, or fear of people finding out a secret, or fear that I did something wrong, things like that. And another big thing was unworthiness. And when I first started learning about the biofield and stuff, I call it a birth story, things that were happening in my parents' lives when I was conceived. And I realized how that affected my emotions because I was an unexpected pregnancy, right? They wanted more children, but at the time they weren't ready for another pregnancy. And being a mother myself, when I had my children, it was like, oh, I can really understand why you felt this way. But as a fetus developing and existing in the mother's womb, the vibrations or the frequency of not wanting that was what gave my mindset of feeling unworthy, because if I'm not wanted, it can't be my parents' fault. It has to be my fault. Something's wrong with me. Or if that's how they feel, then I'm afraid that I'll be rejected at any time, something like that. And of course, I was always very much loved during my life. I was well taken care of. I had close relationships with my parents, but it's the mindset that sticks as a child, the developing mindset between like conception and around 7 years of age, when you perceive things differently because you don't have any background to compare things to. And but when I started learning more about the biofield, I realized that, wow, no matter where around my biofield, the edge, the membrane, wherever I hit around the edge of my membrane, it had terrible dissonance everywhere. And it was it was really hard to dissolve some of the dissonance. And then the very next time it would be right back there, it seems like. So there was tons and tons and tons and tons of dissonance at the membrane. And so in kind of consultation with someone I was working with, it was like, well, maybe it's ancestors, maybe your ancestors still had the mindset of unworthiness, or the mindset of fear, or the mindset of lack, of the bottom side of the hierarchy, instead of a voluntarist mindset. And that's what started me on my path to clear this ancestral dissonance, because it affected me so greatly. And so as I clear not my biofield of all this dissonance, I clear up the stuckness or the stuck energy, the dissonance of their energy. And it's like I'm a different person now because I can change. I can, with positive intentions and positive mindset and positive input, I can now make these big changes in a short amount of time. Whereas the rest of my life, I'd work and work and work personally on issues. And I always fall back on fear, and I'm not good enough, fear, and I'm not good enough. I don't deserve anymore, stuff like that. And it's different now. Life is really good because I don't have that junk, that baggage that I've carried with me all the time. It just kind of disappears. So your biofield continues to hold the memories there. There's always a record, but it's like the oomph is gone. When you clear the dissonance, it's like you know what emotion you felt, but you don't feel that emotion anymore.
It's interesting, and I know as time goes on and more people get interested in this, more and more will likely be known. But even in the spiritual traditions, there's kind of ideas from more than one place that I can think of off the top of my head using the Bible. I remember when I was young, going to Sunday school, and the stories where the father does something wrong, and the assertion is made, this many generations is going to pay the price for what just happened here. Or even the idea of original sin. And when I was young, I used to think, well, that makes no sense at all. How come all these, but it is kind of a similar idea. But on a modern note, you got to wonder, this distancing thing that we're all doing. So if the first biofield's in the neighborhood of 6 feet, and people have been, for the most part, or in a much higher percentage, held apart, what has that done? Has it truly separated us on some kind of not well-known level? You got to wonder. These things don't get chosen at random, I would estimate. But let's see, how much time do we have here? We got a little bit of time left, and I want to get into the actual frequencies. And I haven't had time to look these up. I was under the impression the Schumann resonance was a very low frequency, but let's get into this. One of the assertions you make here is to locate dissonant energy. You're using a 174 cycle, what we call Hertz, unweighted tuning fork, which you say here is related to Schumann and solfeggio. I haven't looked at either of these things. And if that is correct, then they would obviously be connected to earth and nature. And also you make a point to point out that when you're doing this, you use an unweighted fork. I think Jason and I both got weighted forks, but I think we can take the weights off. Can you address that? How did you arrive at 174 Hertz? And is that, you're basically hearing the dissonant tone? Is that it?
Yeah, I use the 174 because for me, it seems to be really easy to hear the difference in the tones. It has a nice, bright, clear tone when you strike it in general. And so then when you come across the dissonance, then it's fairly easy to hear when it's muted or dissonant or high-pitched or squeaky, or, there's all different nuances because every emotion has its own frequency, so they would make the fork sound differently. So that's why the 174 is used as a tone. Now, I have often used a weighted fork in the field. I use 144 Hertz in the Fibonacci to just, and it doesn't make a sound, it's a vibration. When I'm using it, I feel it more in my body instead of with my ears. Of course, I couldn't hear a tone from it, but the vibration changes with things slightly. I rely more on the sensitivity of my nervous system to feel the emotion at that point with that. But when I get to using the 174 and the tone changes, that's easy to hear, and the vibration changes, and you can feel that. But if you get to a really heavy or larger place where the dissonant energy is found, then I usually use the Fibonacci fork, sometimes two of them together, to help dissolve that energy quicker than 174 would. Again, each emotion would have a different frequency, and just so each stuck area you find might release better with one fork or another. So if one doesn't work easily or quickly, then you try something different. Some people use a crystal in conjunction with a fork, or various types of crystals, things like that. There's different ways you can move the fork in the field that seems like the sound or the fork or the field like it or respond better, something like that.
So when I got my fork and I immediately began using it, I have a weighted fork. And just so people know, the fork that we got from Eileen, there's like this little shower head looking thing that goes on the tail or the end you hold.
It's called the circuit boot.
The circuit boot. So then the two like little forks that actually do the ringing, there's these little weights at the top, which I assume are there to, make it ring longer. But I gotta ask, Carla, when I first started doing it, I thought, oh, you just hit it not very hard. And then I noticed, well, I wish it would ring longer. So I started making it ting together. And I noticed when I made it ting together, it resonated longer, and I could hear it more readily because of the high-pitched ting that was introduced. And I also remember you said you used a hockey puck. So I'm wondering, when you hit them together, do you actually ting them together or not?
No. If you're tinging them together, you're probably going to get like a double vibration or, a second shadow vibration. I don't know the scientific terms, but it wouldn't be the clear tone than if you struck it softer or not hard enough to clang them together. So it's hitting them isn't so much, or activating it on a hockey puck or my hiking boot or whatever isn't so much about hitting them hard. It's hitting them, but concentrating on the release or the spring back afterwards.
I know what you mean. It's like you're trying to get a good, even activation. So, I mean, on average, if say you were using a weighted 174, how many seconds do you think before you reactivate it by hitting it on the puck or the boot, if you just had to guess?
Well, it kind of depends on what your purpose is. If you're using it within the biofield and moving from birth into the field and just stopping at stuck energies, you want to keep the tone of the fork a little louder so that it is heard more in the biofield, or so that the vibration is felt more. And so you would have less time between them. So when the tone would start to get quiet, then you could quiet the tines. If you're using a non-weighted fork, you would rest the tines on your arm to quiet them before you struck again and then moved in. So that's a less amount of time for activating the fork. If you're using a weighted fork, you don't have to quiet the tines in between. You can let it keep running as you restrike it on your palm. But again, say like if you're using it to allow flow out of the chakra systems, centers, things like that, then you let it die out to let the biofield go from strong to quiet, to kind of have a natural progression and into that phase. And so it's different things for different processes that you're doing.
So we're coming to the end of the first hour, and people follow me know. I want to know. I want to hear. I want to be able to assess this. Most of what, I'm aware of the biofield, but a lot of the things you've laid down here about ancestry and these other ideas is new to me. And I want to hear it, and I want to be able to assess it. So let me lay down kind of what I've worked out based on some of the things we've touched on before we close down the first hour. And you tell me if I'm thinking about it in the way you meant to convey it. First of all, the energies could be described as a toroid. So what that basically means is to most people an elongated 3D donut where there's this constant flow of energy. So you could almost view one energy channel at, say, 6 feet as almost like a river or a ring of energy or however you wanted to describe it. So it's the idea here that the tuning fork interacts with that flow of energy. And if you detected something anomalous like dissonant harmony or dissonant ringing, or vibration, I guess would be a better word, is the idea that you hold the tuning fork in that stream of energy until it resonates with the fork?
Well, you would need, depending on the energy that you're working with and if it resolves quickly, you would need to, like if it's a big stuck area, you'd need to strike the fork several times in the same spot, like strike it and let it ring, let the tone sound for a while, strike it and let it tone, until when you strike it and put it back, then the tone is correct and clear and bright again. But yes, you hold it in the field. Now, different forks seem to like different movements. So like some of them, you can move it slowly up and down along the side of that dissonant energy. Because I found it seems like those stuck areas, some of them are right in one spot, and some of them seem to envelop quite a larger spread of area in front of your body as you're standing there working on it. But yes, you would repeatedly strike the fork and let the tone sound until the sound was clear again.
Okay, I think we're coming close to the top of the hour, Carla. Can you give people one more shot at your website information?
Sure. It's ancestralriver.com, ANCESTRAL river.com.
So I think a lot, when we first did the Eileen episode, there were so many people who got interested, wanted to get the forks, got to try it out, and all the emails told me, hey, man, there's this other biofield thing. It's kind of like the Akashic Record. And I said, I'm interested. I want to hear it. I wonder how many people will think this is a bridge too far, woo-woo, how many will honestly assess it. But what I notice is a lot of parallels to very old traditions. Maybe some of the oldest traditions, I could kind of see parallels at the limited amount of knowing I know at this point. But Jason, I think we're there. Anything you want to get in before we close down hour one?
Well, in hour two, I'd like to get into the biofield itself a little more. I'm kind of curious with the layering, if there's a consistency to it, if you find the same things in the same places, are the sizes similar between people, or what differences are there and possibly why?
Okay, that does bring the first hour of episode 236 with Jason and Carla, who is a biofield practitioner, to a close. In hour two, we're going to talk about locating dissonant energy. I mean, it's so broad. I didn't even get a fraction into the bullet points that were provided here. And the idea of ancestry is this maybe part of how the Akashic Record is described? I've said endlessly that I accept all day long that every possibility that can be worked out in this 3D reality will in fact be recorded, and information does not get lost in this system. Are we looking at facets of that? But we hope you'll join us on the other side at crow777radio.com. That is the only true Crow site. It is CRROW777radio.com. There are a number of fraud sites at this point. Feels like this is one we can probably run on YouTube, although I'm not sure because the one we ran with Eileen was actually tagged as dangerous. And when I looked for a way to submit to say, hey, man, tuning forks aren't dangerous unless you poke someone in the eye, there was no way for me even to rebut the tag of dangerous that was put on the tuning fork episode. So we will see, but I will attempt to run this. Join us at crow777radio.com for hour two of episode 236 about the extended biofield. There it is, man. Cheers.
is the enemy of knowing.